Welcome. We are very excited to have all of you join us at the Keystone Partners HR Forum in the age of agility. What's an HR leader to do? We absolutely recognize that HR leaders are pushed to the brink today. I'm Elaine Varelis. I'm managing partner at Keystone Partners. And the goal of our HR forum is to bring together HR professionals to learn about current issues, challenges, and trends in the industry. We have an amazing panel for you today, and I'm very excited to be having the opportunity to introduce you to all of them. So I am going to just ask each of the panelists to do a quick intro to who they are and their organization. And then I'm going to open it up to a very general question to get us started. So Lisa, if you would just start with introducing yourself and telling us who you are with, that would be great.
Yes, thank you, Elaine. Hi, good afternoon. My name is Lisa Ariza. I'm a talent management advisor with USAA, and I've been with USAA for 25 years.
Thank you. Holly?
Hi, everyone. My name is Holly Novak. I am the Chief People Officer for Jack Henry. We're a financial technology company that provides resources for banks and credit unions.
Wonderful. Jason?
Hello, Jason Clayton. I'm the CHRO of Filtration Group Corporation in Oak Brook, Illinois. We are a global manufacturer of filtration technologies in various parts of the world.
Nice. Natalie?
Hey everybody, Natalie Wennerstrom, and I am the VP of the Global Business Partner function within HR at CDW. CDW, we are a technology services and solutions provider globally, and I've been with the company 11 years.
Thank you. Ian?
Ian I, VP of Talent Acquisition with Foundation Medicine. We're a biotech owned by Roche with a global presence with about 1,800 employees. I've been there about 3.5 years.
Thank you. And Dayla?
Good afternoon. My name is Dayla Randolph. I oversee talent management and development for Advocate Aurora Health, which is both in Illinois and Chicago, approximately 75,000 team members. I've been in the organization, started as an intern, 16 years. Happy to be here.
That's great. As you can see, we've got an amazing panel, every kind of HR role represented, lots of different industry represented. One of the things I was laughing about that we haven't heard at all lately is HR wanting a seat at the table. So I think the issue is that everyone has given HR the seat at the head of the table over the last few years. And they have certainly recognized that HR has needed to lead so much of what has happened to organizations over the last few years. So I want to start with, again, this conundrum. It's such a great word. And so I'd like you to tell our population about a time where you had to influence the organization. Major paradigm shift to deal with the changes that were happening in the talent market that the rest of the organization may not have necessarily seen as quickly as you did. So tell us, give us a great story about a time you influenced that major paradigm shift.
I can jump in, Elaine. So if you're familiar with CDW, our lifeblood is our sales force. So we have 14,000 coworkers, 4,000 of which are direct sellers. And then another 4,000 are engineers that work directly with our customers. So primarily a customer-facing organization with a smaller subset of corporate functions that enable those groups to be successful. We have an extreme level of tenure in our organization, but not necessarily coupled with age. Most people start at CDW right out of college and find themselves in executive level roles 25, 30 years later. And that account manager sales role is really the one funnel that creates talent pathing within the rest of the organization. So over the last several years and even pre-COVID, we had to influence and battle against this notion of, well, when I did the job in sales 20 years ago, I had to put in 70 hours a week and I lived fully on commissions and I had to earn my stripes and no one handed me anything. And us as HR professionals and business partners primarily supporting sales, we needed to be that mirror to the business to say, well, our attrition is 40% in the first 2 years. Here's what we're hearing from exit interviews. And here's generationally what the expectations are and how they've changed since you started in 1996. And so the strategy we used was a lot of breadcrumbs, a lot of data, and also anchoring in the fact that we all really want the same thing. We want to onboard successful sales individuals. We want to accelerate their contribution to the organization, and we want to be able to retain high quality talent. So for my own approach, it was always going back to, we want the same thing. I get the things that I'm bringing to you might feel different and uncomfortable because it's not any of the experience you had, but the world around us is changing. And funny enough, one of those things was working from home, which was a complete taboo at CDW. Like, if you're not visible, you're doing nothing. That was some of the organizational philosophy. And overnight, COVID happened, everyone's remote over the weekend, and we've never gone back. And in fact, we've never been more productive from a customer facing perspective. And so I don't want to say I was like, told you so, but some of those things that we didn't think would ever be possible and could ever complement our success, we've been forced to actually have to adapt to make that happen. So to sort of summarize, for me, influencing change and sacred cows within organizations really starts with, one, understanding the business, and two, coming to a common agreement of like, we want the same things. My lens is different than yours. So how can we kind of anchor back to that when we have differing points of view, and try things and be willing to, experiment with change and prove that things can be successful.
I could probably add to that, like a similar story, but a little bit different in that I've only been at FG for about 15 months, and it's interesting, like the need to be flexible and to flex around what the organization needs in times of crazy change. So I came here for one reason. It's more of focusing on talent at, around general managers, and the same story I've done a few times in companies that were very M&A focused. And so that's kind of what I came here to focus on. It was interesting. I came here in early 21, and it was in one of the first conversations with my CEO was about that. And the conversation very quickly went into, but you know what the big issue is right now? It's more the front line. So we're a manufacturing company. We have about 10,000 employees around the world. And like Natalie mentioned, salespeople, our critical people in a lot of ways are our manufacturing employees, right? A lot of high volume manufacturing plants around the world where frontline manufacturing workers matter a ton, right? And the war for talent at the front line in manufacturing sites, if you work in a manufacturer, this will resonate with you, is as competitive as I've seen in my entire career. And so, we had more turnover than we're used to. We had factories in small towns that literally couldn't find people. And so the conversation went from, boy, I hired you to do one thing, to focus on that thing in the beginning, but I think that's kind of pivoted. We need to focus a lot more on the front line. And so I had to pivot quickly. And I wouldn't say, Elaine, this was like some idea I had that was out in front of a company. It was kind of a eureka moment that Tim and I had. So we've been focusing a lot on the front line, right? And a lot of companies are increasing wages and things like that, but we've had to really think disruptively. For example, one thing we're exploring right now is, and you probably have seen this, but is like literally like gig focused technology for manufacturing, right? So if you would have said to me that as a manufacturer, I'm going to be open to gig workers, the way like Lyft or Uber, I would tell you, like, I don't see how that works. We are doing that within our organization, and it's really made a big difference in getting access to employees that don't want first or second shift, but they want 4 hours here and 6 hours here, and they're great workers, right? And so that's been a big change for us. And it's just this idea of like being able to flex around doing what your organization needs at the moment and thinking really out of the box, like this whole disruptive idea in manufacturing around gig workers. It's a totally new concept, but it's a potential difference maker if you're open to it.
I think that's a really good point, Jason. And one of the things that we've noticed is that we have to think, just like you said, outside the box related to talent streams just in general. So gig is one of them. One that we've started is apprenticeships. And so we're a technology company, and so we have trouble finding kind of that really critical key talent. And one of the ways that we're doing that is opening up apprenticeships where we'll bring in people that are not necessarily in college, but that are completely new to that sort of work, and then having them go through the process of actually learning how to be an engineer or a software developer, and then really focusing on, of course, after we train them, keeping them at our organization. But that's been really beneficial to us. So we have internships as well, but the apprenticeships are something that's new, that's going really well in our organization as well.
I'll just chime in and add that that's so in healthcare, very similar. You don't hear much about apprenticeships, but we also have started that as well, Holly. So both in our facilities area as well as dietary or cooks, actually. So those are two areas that are hard to find, hard to fill, much needed. Can't run our organization without those two areas. And so we're spending a lot of time there. And, Jason, you hit on the frontline workers. I think that's really kind of like a theme for us as well. Like we're spending a lot of time in that space. And to be differentiators from other organizations, thinking about more than just pay. So in healthcare, to keep our staff, as we were going through COVID and all of that, we felt like we were just shelling out money. We did raise minimum wage. We did shell out money, giving higher differentials because we needed folks to stay. Huge war on talent, and they could go to California and they were getting bonuses of $30,000 to $50,000 to go be there for a few months. And so we had to change our kind of value prop as an organization and start to think about what are those things above and beyond the dollars. We were doing that too, but what else could we provide so that folks could have a career here, right? Like that was kind of our mantra. And so one of the things that I'll just share that we started doing, and this kind of speaks to some of the work that I know a lot of organizations have started in the last few years, given our landscape around diversity and inclusion, but it really was thinking about what our team members needed beyond the job, right? So in their home, meeting them where they are. So that whole social determinants of health, where we focused on our communities and our patients, we started to focus on our team members. And give you a very concrete example of that we've created in the organization, and we're piloting it, which is to speak to that agile flexibility piece I think is really important. They're called success coaches, and it's an opportunity in our environmental services area. So this is the folks that clean our organization, right? We're having conversations to see if they're high in need in certain areas. 80% of the individuals that are coming into that area, high in need in one area, can't get uniforms on the first day. So we pay for them to make sure, we pay for their uniforms, they're just not there on the first day. And so we make sure that they can get from Walmart, black top, black pants. Some of them don't have food on the first day. These are things you don't necessarily think about in the organization. And these are places where retention rate was really high. So shifting the mindset of our organization to not just be focused in the space of, how can we pay more, but how can we meet the needs of the whole person and the individual? So just wanted to share that as well.
I love all your examples, and really the theme is shifting the mindset of the organization, right? Here's where it's been that way for so long. You've got half the organization or more who is committed to keeping things the way it was. And then here you come, or here come other visionaries, other stakeholders who are asking you, conflicting with those others, fix this problem in a new way. Tell us more about where you are in the middle of this conflict, and how you're changing the mindset of the organization.
From a talent acquisition point of view, I think it's important that we are the voice of the outside world, or a voice of it. We're very aware as to what's going on in the competition. This market has been extremely unusual over the last couple of years. Obviously, lots of changes and trends. So we're getting that information back to the executive team and helping to drive decision-making about how we can shift and adapt to the outside market.
I think you also got to be open to, oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Jason.
I think you also have to be open to, if I'm candid, like the best ideas don't have to come from HR, right? So if I'm honest, my CEO worked for years in a senior role, worked his way up at Deloitte, right, which is clearly a services company, and he came into a role 10 years ago running a large manufacturing corporation, and he talked about, when I started, like, why do we have, for example, in our factories, why do we have a point system for attendance for hourly people in the factories? Like, I don't know the answer. It's an honest question. For people that are professional level, if they're not coming to work when they should, we sit down with them and we have a conversation, right? So why do we have these point systems? And I literally was like, I've been in 20 years of manufacturing. I was like, well, because that's all I've ever seen. And if you don't have a point system, how do you hold people accountable for attendance? He's like, well, the same way I would hold you accountable, or I would hold an hourly worker accountable. You sit down, you have a conversation, and you manage it, right? So he literally said, I want to eliminate point systems in all of our factories. And we had plant managers around the world saying, if I'm honest, like, what if people don't come to work? I can't hold people accountable. And because he had a different paradigm, having not grown up in manufacturing, he wasn't as worried about it. And we couldn't see the forest from the trees, right? So we did it. And you know what? Attendance has been the same, and we're treating people with dignity in our factories the way we have been in our offices, right? So it's
the sky didn't fall. The sky didn't fall with a change.
And in a manufacturing environment, it's the idea of like eliminating what has historically been, in my opinion, kind of a two-class system, right? So just because some people have to come to work to be in production, and some people can do their jobs remotely, doesn't mean that, they need to be treated that differently just because one needs to be present and one might not, right? So but for me, if I'm honest, like, he said that and I pushed back, and then I kind of thought about it. I didn't have a good answer. And so he's been right in a lot of this. And so a lot of it is like, it doesn't always have to be your idea. Just be open-minded to others having the idea. And if it makes sense, then consider it. Because you might be the person who's institutionalized because you've been there so long or something.
Well, I think it makes it a lot easier when the CEO comes up with a new idea. What happens what happens when your C-suite are the institutionalized, which is a wonderful multi-meaning phrase, where they recognize that we need this fixed, but they only have the old solutions. And so again, I come back to leaders who are dealing with the real challenges in terms of making changes. And so as HR people, you've all run managing change programs. How do you deal with individual leaders who are having a hard time, especially when they're valuable to the organization and maybe in charge of a large part of the organization? How do you deal with managing change with that population?
I can jump in. One of the things that we've done recently is around, we call our employees associates, so associate experience. And so really focusing on how can we make sure that all of our people are having a good experience from the time that they apply to the time that they retire at our organization. And one of the biggest things was around our internal mobility struggles. And so we had some policies in place that didn't make sense. And so one of them was that you couldn't apply for a job internally unless you've been in your current role for 2 years. And when you think through what in the world, like a millennial coming in and saying, what do you mean I have to stay in my job for 2 years before I can go to another job? They'll leave. And so we had employees that would just quit and then apply back into the job that they wanted to apply for in the first place. And so that clearly was not beneficial. But that was it was a shift for our managers to be able to, because in their mind, they're like, I don't want to lose this employee to this other department. But I'm like, do you want to lose them from the company, or are you okay having them grow and learn in a different department? And so we changed that to 6 months, and I'd like to get it down to 0, but don't tell anybody at our company. It'll happen. But just that shift in mindset of, hey, we want our people overall to grow and learn, and we want them to succeed. And if that means that they go to a different department, but still stay at Jack Henry, it's a win for our whole organization.
I was going to add, Elaine, I feel, so Jason, you were hitting at this, and Holly, you just mentioned it as well. Like, if I go back to this notion of influence, specifically in my type of role as a business partner, in order to really be a catalyst for change, you have to know the business, you have to be credible, you have to have relationships. And for me and the team, like, that's been something that we've really worked on, which is, if once we establish that, then you can be a little bit provocative and start to really push the envelope on the art of the possible. And specifically, this is, your question is very much a CDW statement where we've delivered every quarter for 38 years. No one would ever say like, oh my God, we need to do anything different, but we're in technology and that's changing every single day. And so oftentimes we have a need to change before any indicator would suggest that we need to. And so when we have detractors from change in the executive ranks, for me, it really comes down to humanizing the situation and really like understanding like what is the real issue. And oftentimes I have found that it's more about them as individuals, their own personal concern about becoming irrelevant. The skills that they had that were once very valuable are shifting. We have new executives joining that they feel threatened by, not because they're bad people, but because they're different people. And at times I feel like a therapist, but honestly, it's really like, why are you so against this? Like, help me understand, and really trying to get to the root of the issue and then try to address concerns and help them be a part of the solution or the change. But I think oftentimes it can be easy in HR to just be like, they're a detractor, we're going to work around them, they're not on board, let's focus on the few that are. But the tenure and the loyalty that people have put into companies, there's a lot of value in that. And I think it needs to be respected, not enabled, right? If you're not on board, I also like to help people understand that they too can opt out. Like, it sounds like you aren't on board with what we're doing. Good news, you can make a decision for yourself. But people want to be heard, even executives. So I find like we are in a great position to really unearth some of those insights that might be holding people back from being a part of the new wave of an organization. So that it comes back to being credible, influential, and having those relationships in the first place.
I think that's a
great.
great point, honestly. Like, because just not assuming that everybody's reason for not being open to change is something nefarious or something like that, right? I mean, we just rolled out a major DEI initiative, and we had some questions come up that were frustrating to get, but they were questions, and we had the discussion around like, you know what, we've got a lot of employees, and these questions appear like recalcitrant, but if one person's asking them, like another 1,000 are thinking them, right? So take the time to answer them and try to. It's worth the effort to try to take people that are truly asking questions over the fence and help them understand, because it's the people that are pushing back on needed change are oftentimes not being difficult on purpose. It's something deeper. It might be like, to your point, like they might not feel credible anymore. So help them understand how we can overcome that. And so I think it's almost like slowing down in order to then go fast. That's the way I kind of look at that sometimes.
You all have had, you've created new processes, you've put new things into place, you have high value with the organization, you've got credibility with the organization, you know the business. Those are the core. You recognize that you have to have that. Give us an example of a battle you've lost. And of course, we know it's not forever. As Holly said, and it's going to go down to no days, but tell us about a change that you valued that maybe you weren't able to make happen, that you'll revisit it at some time. Actually, I should say a friend of yours lost a battle, because I know this group never would lose any battles, but something that you would have liked to have seen, perhaps, that wasn't, you weren't able to influence or add to the organization. I might have to come back to that.
I can go.
Yeah.
Okay.
I can go. I feel like I'm talking a lot, but it's fine. So, and I think I shared this when we did our prep. So it's going to be somewhat shocking what I say, because any reasonable HR leader should assume that something that I'm about to mention is foundational to a company. And what I'm describing is a success profile and or competencies at certain levels in the organization. So again, CDW is a fabulous place, but we are like the garage band that hit it big. So like a lot of the foundational things are not super sophisticated, but we have a lot of grit and will that has propelled our success. And so when we're doing things like succession planning, we're discussing promotions, we're looking at slates, we're trying to build skills and capability for future leaders in the organization. There is not a universal view of what great looks like for VPs, for directors, for sales directors, for sales managers. So populations that have 300, plus people, what I think and value is different than the next person. And so one of the things we've tried to get done over the last few years is literally going to the basics of what do we value? What are the skills and experiences that make any VP in this company successful? We can point to all the successful ones. There's some common, traits and characteristics and experiences, but there's been some hesitation. I have yet to discover truly what it is, but that's my goal in 2023. I don't know if it feels too restricted. Like, hey, if we have a blueprint, then what if someone else comes along and isn't this blueprint, then they can't get promoted? I'm like, whoa, it does not need to be, this isn't like a check the box. This is literally a way for us to hold up a mirror to the organization and say, this is what we value. And if we all don't value at least 5 or 6 core things, then that's a problem in and of itself, not being aligned around what great looks like, because we have entry-level folks coming in with a lot of aspiration. They want to know what it takes to get to that next level. And what I would say is going to be different than someone in the business. And so that's the goal, is success profiles, kind of common language and vernacular that we can use to build development plans, greater capabilities, not get in the functional minutia of, oh, you need to know this and be really skilled in DevOps. Like, no, what does a great people leader look like? So we're trying to get really simple and clean going into 2023 and use that as the foundation by which we think of assessment, succession, promotions, rewards. We have a new chief people officer who's fabulous. So we're really leveraging her as a catalyst for some of these things that HR is trying to bring to the table that are desperately needed in the business.
Yeah, I think that, Natalie, it's you've got some comments from the crowd who are chiming in, and I think the issue we're all seeing is patience. That's why you're still here. You're still here tomorrow. There's more to do. You can't do it all in a day, and I think that's a huge part of where we want to go. So just what's changed in terms of your hiring, your promotional decisions? Again, there's a lot of conversation right now about if I'm remote, will I be visible enough to be promoted? What's happening with any of those kinds of thoughts? This is a question from Alfonso Tyson from our group. Dela, what's happened in terms of your focus on changing hiring and promotional decisions?
Yeah, I think, honestly, one big thing, and it's thinking about how we're thinking about hiring differently. So a lot of our processes around hiring have been created to opt people out, meaning how do we screen people out? And so we are thinking about that differently just because of the talent shortage, we have to. But also thinking about our talent differently, how can we opt folks in? So an example of this, right, nursing, we have been for years really focused on MAGIT, which is an accreditation that you would love to have, across all healthcare organizations. We are on the journey of doing that for each of our hospitals. We have 27 hospitals, and for them all to be BSN prepared is critical for that. However, the talent is not there. And there are many nurses throughout the country for us, right, that we could tap into that have their associate's degree, or perhaps are even LPNs, not nurses at all, that can contribute to the care model. And so we are having to think about our care model differently. And when I say opt-in, this is just an example of the credentials that we've had to have in the past in the organization for a highly credentialed industry. We have to think about that differently. And so not even for our clinical folks, but also for non-clinical as well, organizations are, I'll say, the education industry is thinking about things like badging and credentialing, and we are contributing to that as stakeholders and input into the educational process to make sure that maybe folks don't have to have a degree, But if we want to upskill in a particular place, how can we help them with their curriculum? So it's what we need in our organization, and it's meeting their need as well. So folks are no longer necessarily having to have a degree, but just specialize in a certain area. So we are spending our time in that place to help build the capabilities that we need for our organization, but also just thinking about our own policies and procedures. I think Holly said that earlier, differently to opt folks in so that we have a greater pool, a larger pool.
So Anne, you run all of talent acquisition. Are there things, I feel like we should start the list of what is it organizations have said, you know, this will never happen, and those are the things we're going to. Tell us a little bit about where you've gone that way.
Well, I think all of us went through with the pandemic, the whole unknown of remote hiring, remote interview processes. At the beginning of that, there was a question, would people even accept positions without setting foot in the company? Obviously, I think everybody adapted to that very quickly. But some things that we're facing at our company, just due to high growth. When I came in a few years ago, we had 900 employees. We went to add 700 in the first year that I was there. And that rapid growth led us to one area that we were weak was with early career talent. And it was because we were so quickly that people wanted individuals that could hit the ground running. They didn't want to train people. They were hesitant to take somebody earlier career that needed more handholding. And over the past couple of years, we've been able to change the thinking, develop a really strong internship program at the same time, and build out the organization that way. And it's made a tremendous difference to the culture. You can't have all chiefs. You need people actually doing the work as well.
Yeah, I love the diversity here that we're talking about in terms of the high value of the leaders and the C-suite, but the frontline employees, the volume that you're both all talking about, really the focus on that has been so much more significant. So I think part of certainly manufacturing, they're not remote, but others who are more junior. One question we have from Mansi Singhal is, how are you training those new hires with so many of them remote? How are you investing in them to get them to be where you want them to be?
I'll jump into that one. So we were pretty remote before the pandemic, but now we are very, very remote, like 70% remote. And so I think that one of the things that I've been talking with our leaders a whole lot about lately is back again to that associate experience. And so making sure that we enable experience. So whether that's face-to-face or whether that's virtual, but being really intentional and focused on how do we make sure that those people are having a good experience. And so we really care about our culture here at Jack Henry, and we say people first, and we really, really mean it. And so as we're thinking through, you know, we'd love to see people back in the office, but our number one focus should be on how do we get that face-to-face experience. So whether that's just getting together on a quarterly basis or every 6 months and getting your teams together and helping them to have some sort of interaction, I think is really important. So when you think through training and onboarding, making sure that what you're doing is first meaningful, and that people are truly engaged through that process instead of just, you know, a video or whatever where you're kind of spaced out, but making it where it's interactive, it is intentional, so that you can really have that good experience. And so any way that you can focus on associate experience is really key.
I was just going to add, we've recently implemented, we're calling it communities, basically, where I think everyone moved during COVID. The amount of relocations that were submitted, like everyone moved out west or in the south from Chicago, which is where our headquarters and flagship is. And we now have the majority of our population sitting outside of what historically were major hubs for CDW. And so we're putting into effect and have the last few months this notion of communities and community leaders. So we get people together in various geos, but with a purpose. So to your point, Holly, I think that connection and that human interaction, especially for new folks, is really important. So we've mapped out for key roles, what are those critical inflection points that can really bolster relationship building, camaraderie, excitement, engagement. So for our sales classes, they come in the first 2 weeks. We fly them in to a central location. They get to meet all of their classmates. They get to, go to sporting events together, kind of experience the CDW fun. They come back at week 8, which is another critical inflection point where they take grad tests to move to the next phase of our sales training. So bringing them together to study as a group. And then quarterly, we have partner hosted engagement checkpoints where, again, a lot of our population is younger, coming out of college. And CDW is always viewed as like, the 5th year of college, where you're like meeting friends and roommates and future spouses. And that social element of our culture was really important in retaining folks in that sales role. And so we've had to come up with a new way in which to bring people together, but with purpose. For learning, development, camaraderie. And fortunately, the nature of our business model, our partner community, the manufacturer technology companies that we sell, gladly fund these programs for us because they have a vested interest in our sellers selling their products. And so we've been able to find a cost neutral way to leverage our business model to create that connection, which has had a favorable impact on retention in those key inflection points in that first year of a new seller.
Yeah, you have to love that. And it's interesting with all the changes that you're all making. What about the core mission? What about the core values? What about the culture? Is it the same? Is it changing at the organization you're at now, at previous organizations? Is that static? Where does that land?
I think that's a tough question because we have a very strong culture and a very strong mission. Our culture revolves around this idea of 3 things: trust, bias for action, and entrepreneurship. And I generally think personally that culture should, it shouldn't change a ton in short periods of time, but it's a personal preference. But the problem is if your culture is that inflexible, it's going to be hard for you to bring in a diversity of thought and be successful, right? So if you just hire people that fit a certain culture and that culture is somewhat monolithic around, not being diverse, for example, you're going to have a hard time having diverse people be successful, right? So, we have, when we think about DEI within Filtration Group, for example, we think about the idea of trust. So our culture, a big piece of our culture is trust. But we had a very provocative conversation around the idea, and we kind of came up with this thought around when we were talking to somebody who was helping us with this, to be honest, is look, you have a stronger culture of trust when you have an inclusive culture, right? They're at least correlated, if not much more than that, right? So a lot of our initiatives around DEI are focused on inclusion, right? Because if we don't have an inclusive culture, it's going to be hard to say that we have a culture of trust, right? So the work we're doing around DEI is connected to our culture. So our culture, at its very core, doesn't change, but it's got to be able to flex on some level. I think, for example, when you think about assessments that assess potential candidates relative to your culture, if you just stick to that all day, you're going to hire the same kind of person all day long, right? And I don't think that's what you want today, right? So it's kind of a tough question, in that I don't think your culture should be too dynamic personally, but it's got to be somewhat, or you're going to just hire the same kind of person. Does that make sense?
Lisa, I see you nodding. Would you like to add to Jason's comments about culture?
Sure, Elaine. Absolutely, Jason. Definitely agree with everything that you said there. I mean, working for a company that has a very strong mission-focused culture, we know that our employees give their heart and soul daily to our culture, to our employees, to what we stand for. And so having a strong culture, considering all the dynamic changes that we're experiencing in the industry, is really critical. And I feel like for the longevity of employees, who want to stay and who are committed to the organization, culture does play a significant influence or a piece to that. And when they're deciding, I know for me personally, I work with employees who are in transition and who are looking for new opportunities. And culture is the one thing that really is, I would say, probably pretty consistently, that's what keeps them with the organization is the love and the passion for what they do and for who they serve. And so knowing that that they do that for a company with an excellent culture, it means so much. And so I definitely agree with everything that you shared there.
I would agree with that as well. And we have an incredible mission, fighting cancer, which draws people to the company. And certainly the mission is critical, but we also screen on other things such as the fact that we're always changing, that people need to be flexible and they need to have an open mindset. And that sets us up for a lot of what's going on in the market right now. And it's something that there's plenty of people out there that just want to have their head down and not change. That's not going to be the right fit for our company. They're not going to be happy. So that is something that we screen on as part of that culture and values screen.
Nice.
And I'll just add that I just think it's important to have that North Star, right? So, you know, it's hard to change this one much, but our mission is we help people live well. So how we do that might look different depending on the change in time, the change in the times, but it's always, that is our North Star, and that's what we focus on. We have values associated with that: compassion, respect, excellence, right? But again, that's underpinning our strategy. So while strategy might shift and change, we always come back to those things. And thinking about how we select folks into the organization, very similar. Now it's Ian, right? Like the name's so small in there, just want to make sure I get it right. Two of the areas of focus that prior to, so our organization, we went through a merger 4 years ago, maybe 5 years ago now, I've lost track with COVID, but we went through a merger, and a lot of very similar values and behaviors that we expected of individuals, but the things that were different and new were exhibiting courage. So showing up differently, being willing to try new things, being more agile was one of those things. And the other one was fostering resilience, because we know we're going through so much change. And so those types of things can change perhaps as you're kind of creating a new environment or doing something new in the organization. But that North Star, we help people live well, is really foundational for us, and will probably stay that way for a very long time.
Yeah, that's a pretty powerful mission statement. And, you know, we've all worked hard to get them to be compelling, easy to understand, easy to remember. Sounds like you've done an amazing job on that. One question on it's written nicely. Let me read it to us. It says, key questions for inclusion are: what does insert values here mean to you? What does it look like? Can people say it goes to the importance of values and culture being written down, lived by leadership for employees to believe in? Are there values that have been so powerful to your organization that you can describe times what your C-suite has lived in? One of the ones I just want to give timeliness to this. You're probably all reading it with the hurricane that just came through. There was a company who while the CEO was driving away, she delivered a video message to her organization saying, you won't be paid for taking those days off, and just keep working. It's just a storm. And then it took 3 days for things to change. And so there was a real message delivered in terms of the values of the organization. So hopefully none of that was you. I know that was you. But are there highly visible, in the positive or the negative, that you've seen in the news, and the positive that you've seen in your organization?
I mean, we've got, like, our mission is to make the world safer, healthier, and more productive. And, on one level you can say, well, like, who doesn't want to make the world safer, healthier, and more productive, right? So it kind of comes down to brass tacks. So we've done a lot of acquisitions, right? And so, knowing the level I do in terms of acquisitions we look at and don't do, I know for a fact, like, we have not done acquisitions that financially made sense, that their products did not make the world safer, healthier, more productive, right? So I can't share specifics, but that to me, and that's not something, unfortunately, you could share with everybody, obviously not specificity, but it's really cool for me to see that top of the house, we truly don't buy organizations that don't do that, right? So it's, and if you can think of as HR leaders, the extent to which we can share stories like that, I think that really resonates with people.
Anyone else seen a leader demonstrate something like that, either at your own organization or elsewhere, in the good or the bad?
I'll just say from my perspective at Jack Henry, our philosophy is do what's right, do whatever it takes, and have fun. And it's interesting when I was going through the interview process, you know, a lot of times you're like, they say they have a great culture, they say they do what's right and do whatever it takes and have fun. Do they really? And I think that once you get into an organization and truly see leaders that truly care for their people and put their people first, it's very refreshing, and we do that a lot at Jack Henry. And so as we make any decision, truly putting our people first, which I think is what keeps our culture, even when we are, you know, so distributed and so many different places and working remotely, we've been able to keep that culture. And I think that's really, really important to make sure that we always do.
Nice,
Yeah.
nice. Go ahead, Ian.
I was just going to say, it comes down to more than words, and just, it has to be action. And especially if somebody in the organization is not behaving in line with the culture, whether it's at a lower level or at a higher level, that has to be addressed. That can't be rewarded. If the employees see that that's not being addressed, or that person's being promoted despite the behavior, that just, it does a lot of damage. So having the courage to act and seeing the leaders have the courage to act is so critical.
Completely agree.
Absolutely.
I would just add that, sorry.
Go ahead, Dela, go ahead.
I was just going to add that I think also too, when we're able to, anytime you're able to put into your goals or your performance process or any part of the talent process to hold folks accountable, that's also a good sign, right? Like, so we talked today about that's how we select folks into the organization based on that. When you think about measuring performance, that it's a piece of that, right? When you think about opting folks out of the organization, that you're thinking about those things that you say that you stand for. And so seeing in my organization in particular, us really live that out at each phase of the talent process, I think is really important. And one other area I wanted to add is even in like your incentive programs for leaders, right? So to incentivize on the things that we say are really important foundationally, not just financials, but other things in the organization like behavior is really important.
Yeah, I want to come back.
I think what's interesting, sorry, Elaine, I was just going to add a point that Dela made, and just listening to this conversation. I think what's interesting, and I'd be curious if others have this dichotomy, where one of our greatest strengths and values is also a derailer, which any of us who've ever done any type of assessments would say, right? They talk about derailers are strengths that are overused. And CDW, right? The people and coworker orientation, and again, like you were saying, Holly, just the care and way in which we show up for folks in crisis, in hard times, supporting people, the full coworker. We call it CDW Nice, which is just, it's like a big blanket that wraps around our population, and that's what keeps people there. The negative side of that is CDW Nice, which is we don't want to have direct conversations with people that need to be had. Hey, this person's been hiding out for 15 years doing special projects. We're not really sure, but they've given a lot to the company. And it's not just a tenure-based comment, but it's our willingness and desire to treat people with such high levels of dignity and respect at times impedes our ability to have candid, direct conversations, which is why people like me have a lot of influence, because I'm often the person that they're asking to go have some of these difficult conversations. And so for us in HR, we're really trying to push that ownership back into the right places within the business, which is, this is your talent. It is your responsibility to manage, develop, coach. We can help be a partner to you, but I am not going to go have all your difficult conversations on your behalf. So it's just an interesting thing when your greatest asset also is one of the biggest challenges that we have. And so that's something we're trying to evolve as we become a larger global organization, is really being clear about this notion of candor, and candor can be kind and respectful, but being able to deliver feedback and make tough decisions, that's part of being a leader. So that gets into, some of the work that we're hoping to influence into next year.
Natalie, when you solve for that, come back and tell us all about it.
Okay, I will.
I think we've all seen that. And I liked your closing part, Natalie, which is, again, difficult conversations can still be respectful. And I think that's what people really fear. I want to come back to a sensitive area, which is this not everybody gets to be remote. So many people love the remote capability. Dela, certainly the healthcare area, Jason, manufacturing, those of you who have people, lab work where people have to be on site. Some people are feeling a little resentful of that. Are there things, incentives that you're doing for people who are on site, or other special avenues where you're really helping them engage and recognize them? They're keeping the trains running, so to speak. Dela, I liked your success coaches as part of that, because I wrote that one down. I think that's a powerful one, but are there other areas?
What I'll tell you is we kind of ran into this. The folks that went home, because so we have 75,000 people in our organization, 9,000 went home. Basically, our corporate office went home, right? So majority of our folks were still coming in every day. And the folks that were going in every day were saying, not fair that these people get to stay at home. And then the people that were at home were saying, you know, the folks, especially during COVID, they're getting all the free lunches from all the organizations that are donating, and we're getting nothing at home. And so we tried for a little while to figure out how in the world do we satisfy both audiences. And it really came down to, we can't do that, right? Like we need to think about the remote workforce and what is it that they need to be engaged. And it did mean being intentional. I heard that word earlier around, and I think at first it was making sure there was some kind of social face-to-face, even if it was virtual, getting more interactive around that and providing support, because there was still emotional support needed during that time. It just looked and felt differently than it did in the hospital or the clinic setting. And so we had to say, we need different strategies, which I think is another part of this conversation that's really important. Is we can't be all things to all people. And that whole meeting them where they are is really important, that we have to segment our population and provide what they need in certain moments. So similarly to the example of giving the success coaches earlier, that's an example of that too. But that's really what we did, try to kind of, we decoupled our strategies, put it that way.
Nice. We have another question, and from Robin LeBlanc says, we're trying to move to a more fluid talent environment where colleagues can move throughout teams and projects for development purposes. Holly, I think this is speaking to one of your areas. As you can imagine, we're hitting a wall of talent hoarders. Has anyone tackled this? I love the term talent hoarders. And I have seen organizations where managers are actually rewarded when someone from their team goes to another team, because again, they have developed their people, they've trained their people, and that's highly valuable to the organization, as opposed to them just feeling beaten down that they're a great manager and a great trainer and they lose everyone. Have any of you dealt with situations like that?
I've seen that. You know, I've worked in decentralized organizations that, you know, that can be very much an issue. Some of it, to your point, has been comp. We've done things where we've tied the remuneration, the idea of being a net exporter of talent. To me, it's more of a cultural thing, honestly. I mean, you can tie a lot of stuff to comp, and people do things because they're money motivated. But to me, it's at a certain level, you hope people they look at things that kind of from an enterprise-wide perspective. But you know, when you're a manager who develops great talent and they're always giving their talent to other leaders and there's no reciprocity there, honestly, I kind of get the point, right, on some level. So it's really got to be one where your talent process needs to facilitate people moving around the enterprises. And when one leader loses 3 high potentials to another leader, but they're also the beneficiary of that via the reciprocity back into their business, then you don't have that as much, right? So it's when you start to reward net exporters of talent and they start to be celebrated, and more of your leaders are net exporters of talent, then I think that problem tends to work itself out. But I personally think that that's more of a cultural thing than it is, then it's going to be solved through compensation in some way.
That's great. That's great. Okay, two questions to end with. So you get to take your choice. We're going to say constant change. We know it's a given. So what does success look like in constant change? Or the flip side, what are you excited about next? So you can let us know that as we wrap up.
I think success with constant change just looks like making sure that we are putting our people first and doing what's best for our people. You know, if you don't put the people first, then you're not going to be successful with your strategies, with your clients, with anything else that you're doing. And so as we're going through the change, which we know is not going to end, making sure that as we're making decisions, as we are making choices and all those things related to comp and talent acquisition and retention, is just making sure that we are putting our people first.
Yeah, I would say I'm excited about, I mean, what a great time to be in HR. I know a lot of us have been in it a long time, and we fought the good fight for a long time. And, you know, I think we were talking about the old like SHRM conferences where it was like how to get a seat at the table like 12 years ago. And you had said, we have a seat at the table and we really get to influence positive outcomes for organizations, which in turn impacts the lives of people. And I just think that's an awesome responsibility that we get. And it's just exciting to be a part of a really relevant profession at this day and age as where we're at in the world, right, with people and working. And so that's mine.
Terrific.
And I'll just add from an excitement standpoint, excited to see like the change in talent, how we think about our talent. I think we're just on the verge of getting really good at it. I know it'll be a long path, but I'm excited to thinking about our talent differently in several different industries.
That's great. Well, as we come to a close, I want to thank you all and certainly thank all of our attendees for coming to the Keystone Partners Human Resources Forum. You've been an amazing panel. These are challenging times, exciting times. And we'll bring you all back in a year and see what's happened so you can give us an update on the next version of the conundrum. And to our Chicago attendees, just an update that you'll be getting information about an in-person HR forum happening in the downtown Chicago market with a focus on what am I seeing? Is it a mental health issue? So we look forward to seeing all of you at the next HR forum. And thank you all so much for attending.